All right, so maybe you're craving Osso Buco, but the thought of veal shanks has you feeling a little intimidated.
Yeah.
Well, good news. We're diving into a recipe that makes this classic Italian dish.
Okay.
Totally approachable, even if you're not a seasoned chef.
Nice.
And get this, our source material is actually a speakable version of the recipe.
Really?
Almost like someone's guiding you through it in your kitchen.
Oh, that's interesting. It's fascinating how recipes are evolving, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's where we come in.
Right.
To break it all down.
Yeah.
Highlight the most important parts.
Exactly. And the first thing that caught my eye is that this recipe calls for beef shanks instead of veal. That's a game changer, right?
Absolutely. Beef shanks are not only easier on the wallet,
Yeah.
but they're also much easier to find at your local supermarket.
Sure.
You still get that rich melt-in-your-mouth texture
Right.
that Osso Buco is known for,
Yeah.
but with a much more accessible ingredient.
Okay. So we've got our beef. Now, the recipe mentions an optional flour coating.
Okay.
Is that really necessary? I'm all about simplifying things wherever possible.
It's optional for a reason, but it does serve a purpose.
Okay.
That light dusting of flour helps to thicken the sauce as the meat simmers,
Right.
giving it that luscious velvety texture.
Yeah.
Think of it like a little magic trick for your sauce.
Oh, I see. But what about our gluten-free friends? Are they out of luck?
Not at all. The recipe is very mindful of that.
Good.
It suggests using cornstarch or arrowroot powder as excellent gluten-free alternatives.
Okay.
They'll create that same silky smooth sauce without using any gluten.
That's great. It's all about those thoughtful little details, isn't it? All right.
Wow.
So we've prepped our beef.
Okay.
We've got our flour situation figured out.
Yeah.
What's the next step in our Osso Buco adventure?
Now we're getting to the exciting part.
Ooh.
Searing the meat.
Okay.
The recipe really emphasizes using high heat for this step. And it's not just about achieving that beautiful golden brown crust,
Yeah, sure.
although that definitely adds to the visual appeal.
I can practically hear that sizzle already.
That sizzle is the sound of flavor development in action.
Oh, wow.
You see, when you sear meat over high heat, something amazing happens called the Maillard reaction. Basically, the intense heat causes a chemical reaction
Okay.
between the proteins and sugars in the meat,
Yeah.
creating hundreds of new flavor compounds.
Wow. So searing is not just a visual thing, it's a flavor power move.
Exactly. And speaking of flavor, the next step is where we really build on that foundation.
Okay.
It's all about deglazing the pot after searing, and this is where things get really interesting.
You mean scraping up all those irresistible brown bits from the bottom of the pan? I've always been a bit obsessed with those.
I get it. Those bits are pure culinary gold.
Hmm.
They're called fond, and they're packed with concentrated meat juices and caramelized sugars
Yeah.
that add a depth of flavor you just can't replicate any other way.
So deglazing is like mining for flavor then. We're literally extracting those concentrated flavors from the bottom of the pan.
That's a great way to put it. By adding liquid to the hot pan and scraping up the fond,
Yeah.
we're dissolving all those delicious compounds.
Right.
And incorporating them into the sauce, creating a richness you can't get otherwise.
Okay, so we've seared our beef to perfection.
Well,
We've mined our flavor gold.
Yep.
What happens next?
now comes the part that requires a little patience.
Okay.
Slow simmering.
Yeah.
This recipe calls for a low and slow approach, letting the meat gently braise for a couple of hours.
Braising.
Yeah,
Is that different from just simmering?
it is. Braising is a technique that uses moist heat to break down tougher cuts of meat like our beef shanks,
Okay.
making them incredibly tender and flavorful.
Yeah.
Think of it like a gentle spa treatment for your meat.
I love that analogy. So we're essentially transforming these tough shanks into melt-in-your-mouth morsels through the magic of braising.
Precisely. And while that slow simmering is working its magic,
Uh-huh.
all those amazing flavors we've built up are also melding and deepening, turning a simple dish into a symphony of taste.
This is making me so hungry.
Yeah.
So after all that delicious simmering, are we finally ready to dig in?
Almost. The recipe mentions a couple of final flourishes that really elevate the dish.
Okay.
First, we say goodbye to the bay leaf.
All right.
Its
now.
job is done.
Right.
Then comes the essential step of tasting the sauce
Of course.
and adjusting the seasoning with salt and pepper.
Ah, yes. The taste test. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. But how do we make sure our beautiful, flavorful Osso Buco looks as good as it tastes?
The recipe suggests adding a sprinkle of fresh parsley for a pop of color and a little bit of lemon zest for brightness.
Ooh.
Don't underestimate those finishing touches.
Right?
They can make a world of difference.
It's all about that balance, isn't it?
Oh.
The richness of the dish with the freshness of those final additions. It sounds absolutely perfect. Now, I know the recipe mentions serving this Osso Buco over mashed potatoes polenta or with crusty bread, but I'm wondering, are there any other sides that would complement these rich flavors?
That's a great question. And this is where your own creativity can really shine.
Okay.
You go with something classic like creamy polenta.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking something with a touch of acidity to cut through the richness might be even better.
Okay.
Maybe a bright citrusy salad with some peppery arugula and a vibrant vinaigrette.
Ooh, I love that idea. The citrus would be a delightful contrast.
Yeah.
And the peppery arugula would play so well with those savory notes. We're really taking this Osso Buco to the next level.
Exactly. It's all about exploring those flavor combinations.
Yeah.
And making the dish your own.
Right.
And who knows, maybe this will inspire you to try braising other cuts of meat too.
Ooh.
The possibilities are endless.
Speaking of possibilities, before we move on to exploring the broader world of braising, let's quickly recap what we've learned so far about making the simplified Osso Buco. We started with the brilliant swap of veal shanks for beef, making it more accessible and budget-friendly.
Right.
Then we unlocked the secrets of searing for maximum flavor and deglazing to capture those delicious brown bits.
And we delved into the magic of slow simmering or braising.
Yeah.
To transform those tough shanks into tender, succulent morsels.
Right.
We even explored some creative serving suggestions to make this dish truly shine.
You know, I think we've just scratched the surface of what's possible with this recipe.
Yeah.
It's not just a delicious meal, it's an introduction to a whole new world of cooking techniques.
I completely agree. And it brings us to a thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Ooh, I like it.
What other cuts of meat could you transform using this braising method?
Okay.
We'll dive into that next, but for now, let that simmer in your mind.
Ooh, I love that. We're leaving our listeners with a little culinary cliffhanger. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at the origins of Osso Buco itself. Where did this delicious dish come from?
Well, Osso Buco, which literally means bone with a hole in Italian, traces its roots back to Lombardy,
Okay.
a region in northern Italy.
All right.
It's a dish that reflects the ingenuity of cucina povera, or poor cooking,
Interesting.
where every part of the animal was used resourcefully.
So it's a dish born out of necessity and creativity. Oh, I love that. It's a reminder that amazing food doesn't have to be complicated or expensive.
Exactly. And while veal shanks were the traditional choice,
Right.
the use of beef shanks, like in our recipe today,
Yeah.
became more common as veal became harder to find and pricier.
Sure.
It's a great example of how recipes evolve and adapt over time.
It makes you appreciate the history and evolution of food, doesn't it? It's not just about the recipe itself. It's about the stories and traditions behind it.
Absolutely.
Ugh.
And speaking of traditions, the core elements of Osso Buco have remained remarkably consistent over time.
Okay.
The slow braising, the rich sauce,
Yeah.
the tender, flavorful meat.
Right.
It's a testament to the timelessness of this dish.
This has me wanting to explore the world of braising even further. What other classic braised dishes do you think our listeners should try?
Oh, there are so many delicious options.
I bet.
If you're looking for something with bold, warming flavors, Moroccan tagines are a must-try.
Okay.
They often feature lamb or beef, braised with dried fruits, spices like cumin and cinnamon,
Yeah.
and nuts for a touch of richness and crunch.
Ooh. The aromas alone sound incredible.
And if you're craving something closer to home, American pot roast is another classic example of braising. It's typically made with a chuck roast,
Right.
braised with vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and onions,
Mm-hmm.
and seasoned with herbs like thyme and rosemary.
That sounds like the ultimate comfort food, especially on a chilly evening.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And it highlights how braising can transform simple ingredients into something truly special.
I'm starting to think of braising as a culinary superpower.
Mm-hmm.
It's like alchemy in the kitchen, turning ordinary ingredients into pure gold.
I love that analogy. And the best part is, braising is a very forgiving technique.
Oh, good.
It's hard to mess it up.
All right.
As long as you have a decent recipe,
Yeah.
a heavy pot, and a little patience,
Right.
you're practically guaranteed a delicious outcome.
So it's a low-stress, high-reward kind of cooking. I'm all for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why this Osso Buco recipe is such a fantastic starting point.
Yeah.
For anyone interested in exploring braising, it's simple, it's flavorful, And it's practically foolproof. Plus, once you master the basics,
right,
you can get really creative.
I love that. It's all about embracing the joy of cooking and experimentation. But before we get carried away with our braising fantasies, I want to circle back to this Osso Buco recipe. There's one detail I'm curious about.
Of course. What's on your mind?
The recipe mentions using a Dutch oven for this dish.
Okay.
But I know not everyone has one.
Right.
Are there any other pots that would work just as well?
That's a great question. A Dutch oven is ideal because it's heavy and retains heat evenly, which is crucial for braising. But if you don't have one,
right,
you can use any heavy-bottomed pot with a tight-fitting lid.
So essentially any pot that can hold heat well and create a nice steamy environment for the braising process.
Exactly. The key is to make sure the pot is large enough to comfortably hold the meat and the braising liquid without overcrowding.
Speaking of the braising liquid, the recipe calls for a combination of water or beef stock, diced tomatoes, and then more beef stock.
Okay.
I'm curious about that layering. Why both water or stock and then more stock later on?
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
The initial water or stock is primarily for deglazing the pot.
Okay.
Helping to loosen up all that flavorful fond we talked about.
Right.
Then the addition of diced tomatoes and more beef stock adds depth, richness, and complexity to the braising liquid.
So it's all about creating a sauce that's not only flavorful, but also has a beautiful texture.
You got it. Using that combination ensures the sauce has both a balanced flavor and a lovely velvety consistency.
Okay, I think we've covered all the bases here.
Yeah.
We've discussed the pot situation, broken down the braising liquid.
Right.
And even brainstormed some exciting new braising adventures.
Yeah.
Would you say we've officially mastered the art of Osso Buco?
I think we're well on our way. But the beauty of this dish, and braising in general, is that it encourages you to personalize it.
Okay.
You can adjust the seasonings, experiment with different vegetables.
Yeah.
Even tweak the braising liquid to suit your taste.
I love that. It's not just about following a recipe, it's about making it your own.
Exactly. That's a great takeaway for our listeners.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to experiment and get creative in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Use this Osso Buco recipe as a starting point.
Right.
Then let your culinary instincts guide you.
I love that. It's all about embracing the joy of cooking and discovering your own culinary voice.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Okay.
What would you do with those delicious leftovers?
Oh, leftovers.
This recipe makes a generous amount of Osso Buco.
Yeah.
So think about how you could repurpose those flavorful morsels into something new and exciting.
Ooh, leftovers. They're a gift, aren't they?
They are.
Especially when it comes to something as delicious as Osso Buco.
Absolutely.
But before we get lost in a world of leftover possibilities, let's bring it back to our listeners and hear what they think. What stood out to them about this recipe or about braising in general?
I'm particularly fascinated by how this recipe demystifies a classic dish.
Yeah.
Making it accessible to home cooks of all levels.
Right.
It shows you don't need to be a professional chef to create something truly impressive.
It's empowering, right?
It is.
It's like saying, hey, you can do this too. You can create restaurant-quality meals in your own kitchen.
Exactly. And it reminds us that good food is more than just following instructions.
Right.
It's about understanding the techniques, the ingredients, and the why behind each step.
It's about connecting with the food we make and the people we share it with. Speaking of sharing, I'm curious.
Yeah. What kind of occasion comes to mind when you think of Osso Buco? Is it a cozy family dinner, a special celebration, or something else entirely?
For me, Osso Buco has a sense of occasion to it.
Okay.
It's a dish meant to be savored, enjoyed with good company, maybe a nice bottle of wine.
Yeah.
It's the kind of meal that creates lasting memories.
I love that. It's more than just sustenance.
Right.
It's an experience.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that food has the power to connect people.
Yeah.
And create a sense of warmth and togetherness.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment to carry with us as we continue our Osso Buco journey. But before we move on, there's one more thing I want to touch on.
Of course. What's on your mind?
I've always been fascinated by the cultural nuances of food.
Okay.
While Osso Buco is undeniably Italian, are there any other cultures that have similar braising traditions or dishes that our listeners might enjoy exploring? Ooh, that's a great question. It would be interesting to see how different cultures approach the art of braising and what unique flavor profiles they bring to the table.
Exactly. And maybe our listeners can even share some of their own family traditions or favorite braised dishes from their heritage. It's all about expanding our culinary horizons.
I love that. So to our listeners, we encourage you to not only master this delicious Osso Buco recipe, but to also dive deeper into the world of braising.
Right.
Exploring different cultures, ingredients, and techniques.
And remember, the best way to learn is by doing.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to experiment, get creative, and most importantly, have fun in the kitchen.
Yeah.
We can't wait to hear about your culinary adventures.
That's a fantastic point. It's like we've opened a door to a whole new world of culinary possibilities. Thinking about those global braising traditions has me wondering, are there any other must-try dishes you think our listeners should add to their culinary bucket list?
Oh, absolutely. If you're intrigued by those Moroccan tagines we mentioned earlier,
right,
you could explore dishes like a lamb tagine with apricots and almonds,
right,
or a beef tagine with prunes and preserved lemons. The combination of sweet, savory, and tangy flavors is truly captivating.
Those sound incredible. I'm already picturing the vibrant colors and intoxicating aromas. It's like taking your taste buds on a trip to Morocco.
And closer to home, you could venture into the world of French cuisine with a classic boeuf bourguignon. It's a hearty beef stew braised in red wine with bacon mushrooms and pearl onions. Talk about comfort food.
Boeuf bourguignon. That's one of those dishes I've always wanted to try but felt a little intimidated by. Do you think it's something a home cook can realistically tackle?
Absolutely. Might sound fancy, but it's really just a matter of slow cooking beef in a flavorful liquid.
Okay.
The key is to give it plenty of time to develop those deep, rich flavors.
So it's another example of how braising can elevate simple ingredients into something extraordinary. It's like a culinary time machine transforming tough cuts of meat into tender, flavorful masterpieces.
Exactly. And speaking of those leftover possibilities we teased earlier,
right,
let's dive into some creative ways to repurpose that delicious Osso Buco. After all, it would be a shame to let any of those flavorful morsels go to waste.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all about making the most of leftovers, especially when it comes to something this good. What are some of your favorite ways to give Osso Buco a second life?
Where you could shred the meat and toss it with pasta.
Okay.
For a hearty, satisfying ragu, imagine those rich flavors clinging to every strand of pasta.
Ooh, that sounds incredible. I could see that becoming a weeknight staple. What other ideas do you have?
For a lighter option, you could use the shredded meat to create flavorful lettuce wraps or spring rolls. Just add some fresh herbs, crunchy vegetables, and a zesty dipping sauce.
Those sound perfect for a light lunch or a summer appetizer. See, this is what I love about leftovers. They're like a blank canvas for culinary creativity.
Exactly. And if you're feeling adventurous, you could even try incorporating the Osso Buco meat and sauce into your risotto. Just imagine those rich flavors mingling with creamy arborio rice.
Okay.
It's pure comfort food heaven.
Oh my goodness, that sounds divine. I'm already drooling just thinking about it. We've talked a lot about the versatility of the meat.
Right.
But what about that incredible sauce? Are there any creative ways to use that on its own?
Absolutely. Don't let a drop of that flavorful sauce go to waste. You could drizzle it over roasted vegetables.
Okay.
Stir it into soups or stews for an extra layer of richness.
Yeah.
Or even use it as a base for a savory pasta sauce. The possibilities are endless.
Okay, we've officially convinced me that leftovers are a gift. They're not just about convenience, they're about extending the enjoyment of a delicious meal and exploring new culinary possibilities.
Exactly. And speaking of exploring,
right,
before we wrap up our deep dive into Osso Buco, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Right.
The idea of different cultures and their unique approaches to braising. I'm curious, are there any braising traditions from your own heritage or family history that you'd like to share?
Well, my family is from the American South.
Okay.
And we have a long tradition of slow cooking and braising, especially when it comes to pork. We'd often braise pork shoulder with collard greens, creating a meal that was both flavorful and incredibly comforting.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah.
It's amazing how braising techniques can be found across so many different cultures.
Yeah.
Each with its own unique twist. It really speaks to the universality of this cooking method.
It's a reminder that food can be a powerful way to connect with our heritage and share our stories. It's not just about sustenance, it's about tradition, family, and cultural identity.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a wonderful sentiment to leave our listeners with. As you embark on your own Osso Buco adventures, remember that it's more than just a recipe. It's an opportunity to explore history, culture, and the joy of cooking.
I couldn't agree more. So to our listeners, whether you're a seasoned chef or just starting out, We encourage you to dive into this simplified Osso Buco recipe.
Absolutely.
Let it be your gateway to the wonderful world of braising.
And don't forget, we're always eager to hear about your culinary triumphs.
Right.
Share your Osso Buco creations and braising discoveries with us. We might even feature them in a future episode.
That's a great idea. We love seeing what our listeners are cooking up. Now, before we officially wrap up, I want to make sure our listeners have all the resources they need to create their own Osso Buco masterpiece. Where can they find the full recipe with those helpful step-by-step photos?
You can find the complete recipe along with some additional tips and tricks over at eateryslice.com. It's a fantastic resource for all things culinary, and we highly recommend checking it out.
Excellent. And if you're looking for even more inspiration, be sure to explore their website for other delicious recipes and culinary adventures. But before we say goodbye, I have one final thought for our listeners.
I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
As we've seen, Osso Buco is more than just a dish. It's a story, a tradition, a testament to the power of slow cooking and the magic of transforming simple ingredients into something truly extraordinary.
I couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that cooking is about more than just following a recipe. It's about connecting with our heritage, exploring new flavors, and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Osso Buco truly is a dish that embodies the heart and soul of cooking. It's a reminder that even something as simple as slow cooking meat can create an unforgettable experience.
And it's a testament to the ingenuity of those who came before us, those who found ways to transform humble ingredients into culinary masterpieces.
Speaking of those who came before us, I'm curious, have you ever had a chance to try a truly traditional Osso Buco? Maybe one made by an Italian grandmother who's been perfecting her recipe for decades.
You know, I haven't had that exact experience. But I have had the pleasure of trying Osso Buco in Milan, where it originated.
Oh, nice.
And it was truly special. There was a depth of flavor. And a sense of tradition that you just can't replicate easily.
I can only imagine. It's like those flavors carry the history and stories of generations past. It makes you appreciate the power of food to connect us to our roots and to other cultures.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes exploring food so fascinating. It's not just about the ingredients or the techniques. It's about the stories, the traditions, the people behind the dishes.
It's about the journey, isn't it? The journey of discovery, the journey of flavors, the journey of connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
That's beautifully said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Osso Buco, I think that's a perfect sentiment to leave our listeners with. Embrace the journey. Explore the possibilities, and don't be afraid to create your own culinary stories.
I couldn't agree more. So to our listeners, whether you're a seasoned chef or just starting out, we encourage you to dive into this simplified Osso Buco recipe. Let it be your gateway to the wonderful world of braising.
And remember, cooking is about more than just following a recipe. It's about creativity, experimentation, and most importantly, having fun. So go forth, braise with confidence, and savor every delicious moment.
And don't forget to share your culinary creations with us. We love seeing what you're cooking up. Until next time, happy braising.